It's no longer just scientists who say climate change is a threat. Overnight, a panel of former Pentagon leaders released a report calling it a direct threat to national security. According to the bipartisan group, extreme weather is a catalyst for conflict, particularly in unstable regions where resources are already vulnerable. This follows the government's newest report that shows human activity has had a dramatic impact on our climate over the last 50 years. Nevertheless, there are still some, like Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who say things to keep up a debate. He set off the latest round over the weekend and then tried to clarify a bit yesterday.
I do not believe that human activity is causing these dramatic changes to our climate the way these scientists are portraying it. I have no problem with mitigation events, and quite frankly, I have no problem with advances in technology. But I by no means am going to go out and tell people that if we do these things that they're proposing, by changing these laws and the way we conduct our energy policy, that it would have any measurable impact on our weather, because it's not accurate to say that.
Other legislators have gone even further. California Congressman Dana Rohrabacher says global warming is a fraud. 3 separate times, House Republicans have voted down legislation stating that climate change is real as far as having a man-made impact. But folks, this is not entirely new. It echoes similar debates we've had in the environment in the past that saw opposition questioning science, the motives, and the cost, and yet changes were ultimately made. In 1974, a pair of California scientists became the subject of an intense PR campaign after they concluded that chemicals known as CFCs were destroying the ozone layer. DuPont's chairman of the board, Irving Shapiro, called the theory a science fiction tale, a load of rubbish, utter nonsense. The Wall Street Journal published multiple editorials on the issue, including one in 1984 warning that a ban on CFCs would cost the economy $1.5 billion in lost profits. But the science was vindicated when a massive hole in the ozone layer was discovered over Antarctica in 1985, leading to a gradual ban on CFCs in the late 80s. When you look at the debate over acid rain, it's the same story. Damage to the environment led scientists to focus on high levels of pollutants that were mixing with rain in our atmosphere. But skepticism was widespread, particularly inside the Reagan administration. He dismissed an EPA proposal to deal with acid rain after his Office of Management and Budget criticized it as wasteful government spending. The president himself dragged his heels for years on this, arguing that more research was needed.
So what we've been trying to do is avoid going down some avenue that would disappoint us, and we wouldn't really solve the problem, but we would have wasted our resources.
Where Reagan saw political liability, George H.W. Bush saw an opportunity. He campaigned on pollution control, and in 1990, he helped amend the Clean Air Act to cut acid rain pollutants. In 2012, a report from the White House called the program remarkably successful, ultimately slashing sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide levels by nearly 2/3. Joining me now, Christine Todd Whitman. She was former New Jersey governor and head of the Environmental Protection Agency under President George W. Bush. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chuck.
So, I wanted to go down this path and sort of compare, and it does feel repetitive here, does it not, to you, sort of the debates that were had about CFCs and the ozone layer, about acid rain, and the same debate we're having now on climate change, sort of the business community on one side claiming, are we sure the science is right, and feeding that narrative. On the left, environmentalists saying, no, the science is right, what are you guys talking about? Is it as familiar to you as it is that it looks to me?
It is, and it's very disappointing that it continues this way, because we've seen that the past actions that we took to address the CFCs, to address acid rain, actually had a positive impact in it. A narrowing of the hole in the ozone layer, in the resurgence of the lakes that were dying in Maine and New Hampshire from acid rain. So we've seen cause and effect. We've seen it work. I mean, you have 300 scientists on this latest report. You have, and outside of some 30 or 40 who have vetted it from the outside. You have the American Security Project has a whole site up on its website talking about the threat to national security. Now you have the military stepping forward the way they are. It's time for us to understand that we can take these actions, as we've done in the past, and not crater the economy. The economy was doing very well in the 70s and 80s, thank you, and into the early 90s, and that's when we were dealing with CFCs, and that's when we were dealing with acid rain. So we've proven we can do it, and do it in a sensible way that keeps the economy growing.
So how do you have a conversation with those? What do you think, where is this sort of fear? And that's what it looks like to me, because you probably have individual conversations with various lawmakers who privately say one thing and publicly are fearful of having a backlash if they talk too much about climate change. So I guess my question to you is, how do you change the politics inside the Republican Party on this issue?
Well, it's tough, and it's going to take people to do it. And I think the public now is getting more engaged in this issue because they're seeing the more frequent and more severe storms and tornadoes. And while no scientist will say any particular storm or weather event was due to climate change, this is exactly what they say we can expect from climate change as we see more droughts, more flooding, that sort of thing. So it's now starting to become real to the individual, and that's always the challenge with the environment. You are talking about issues that most people feel are way out there over which they have no control.
Right.
They don't see it in daily impact. We've got to make it real to people individually. And one of them, I don't know if you saw the study that came out a while ago that said it last year, dealing with and responding to natural disasters cost the country $100 billion. $300 for every man and woman in the country. That's starting to be real money because that's taxpayers' money. That's our money.
Right.
And we see taxes go up. We don't like that. But so let's start to get smart. We're not going to stop climate change because the climate's been changing since it was formed, but we can slow it down so we can manage our response to it, get out of the more dangerous zones, and handle it in a way that keeps the economy growing and is sustainable for the future.
Well, I think last year was 40 separate $1 billion natural disaster cleanups around the world, I think is what that one statistic I think that you were also that same report that you were referring to. What is give me this before we go, give me the one piece of sort of moderate, small legislation that could get done by this Congress, you think, that sort of almost would be the proving, to sort of prove to some skeptics that man can do something about this, prove to skeptics that could be done short term to sort of as almost like a test to say, see, this can have an impact in a positive way on climate change?
I don't know what one small piece of legislation would be to do that. We have the proof in what we have done in the past. When President George H.W. Bush, 41, went through in 1990 the bitter battle, and it was both sides of the aisle on the Clean Air Act reforms to get at acid rain as part of that. That was a bitter battle, but we've seen the results. And what it did is it reinvigorated an economy that was starting to be negatively impacted. Tourism, fishing, all those things that were being impacted by acid rain. I don't know what small piece of legislation you could put forward now other than to say, look at the record. Look at where we've taken action before and the impact that it's had. Look at how the economy's grown.
Right.
Let's be sensible about how we look at this in the future and understand that we do have an impact. We're not causing it solely, but we're clearly having an impact, and there are things we can do to slow it.
Well, hopefully people will remember history, even short-term history. Anyway, Governor Christine Whitman, former head of the EPA, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in.
Good to talk to you, Chuck.